Shalom. Today we are looking at the Book of Jude. This is written by Yehuda, a slave of Yeshua the Messiah, according to the first line, and a brother of Yaakov, who is, of course, half-brother to Yeshua himself. So we know that the dating of this is early in the period after death and resurrection of our Master. This is written generally to people. It's not written to any specific congregation. And since it's so early, we know that it is written specifically to predominantly Jewish believers. Now there is an admonition in here, very early on within the book, against listening to false teachers. Now, in our times today, there are a lot of different kinds of teachings, and they are accessible online, an incredible amount of accessibility. Consequently, we have to kind of be careful. If we look at the Hebrew roots movement in and of itself, this seems to be filled with a lot of people out of Christianity who for the first time are looking at Torah and looking at the Jewish origins of the faith in Yeshua the Messiah. Now, this is an interesting phenomenon. It is a relatively new phenomenon. Back in biblical times, until now, this really has not taken place, where we have non-Jewish people interested in Jewish things. And so consequently, they have no real concept or grasp of Judaism of itself. And the fact that Judaism has had its progression and its following of God in its own way for the past 2,000 years. Many of the biblical concepts, or virtually all of biblical concepts of the Old Testament, have had Jewish people studying them and vetting opinions for thousands of years. We have developed a tradition through this vetting that we look at each of the well-known students and writers of biblical concepts through this period of time. About 1,000 years ago, we had Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, otherwise known as Rashi. And Rashi's commentaries were so good, they've been vetted over and over and over again. And they are still, even after this vetting process, known to be some of the best. And so when we study Old Testament and Old Testament concepts, one of the first things we do as Jewish people is we look at Rashi. What does Rashi say? And this is an important thing. It keeps us from continually having to reinvent the wheel. Then, 100 years or so after Rashi, was Maimonides, Rav Moshe ben Maimon. And his commentaries also were so good, they've been vetted over and over and over again, and still we use them constantly because of their consistency and their accuracy as far as biblical concepts are concerned. So from a Jewish background, it's very simple and very easy and always done that when we look at a biblical concept, we look at Rashi, we look at Rambam. And then 100 years after the Rambam was someone else, was Nachmanides out of Spain. And his commentaries were also so good that they survived being vetted for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so we still use them. So when we look at a biblical concept, what does Rashi say? What does Rambam say? What does Ramban say? Nachmanides. We look at these things and they keep us grounded on the right path, and they keep us from continually having to reinvent the wheel. Now, unfortunately, for new understanders, the Torah is an important part of life. as they look into this and they're looking at the Hebrew roots, they tend not to have these background vettings. So they don't know to look at Rashi. They don't know to look at Rambam. They don't know to look at Ramban. They don't know to look at any of the commentators that base what they say on these three. And so what we have is missing things, reinventing the wheel. It's not out of malice that the teachings are wrong. It's out of not studying the history and not studying these great Rishonim, these great commentators that we have through our history, whose commentaries have been vetted for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so what happens is they end up following their own hearts and their own eyes and really coming up with ideas that will not stand the vetting. Again, it's not out of malice, it's just out of not knowing the history and being ignorant. And this is not to be taken as something surprising. If we look at the end time prophets, they all talk about the fact that the nations, the Goyim, will be coming to the Jewish people to learn the ways of God. And in doing so, it's not going to be a straight path. It's going to undergo twists and windings. People are people, and we never just get it right in a straight line. So these times where we have all of these different teachings of people that really don't have the background and don't have the history of how to study, this is to be expected. It's something that is to be understood as being part of the fulfillment of end times prophecy. We're getting there. We're getting closer. We're headed in the right direction, and not all of the direction is straightforward. And so, from the Book of Jude, we see that we should not pay attention to the false teachings. But at the same time, it shouldn't be a matter of anger or lashing out or anything like that. It's something that is a sign of the end times. Every day is one day closer to the return of Yeshua HaMashiach. And so study the good teachings. Stay away from the bad teachings. And when Messiah returns, things will be set right. Shalom. This is Steve Bernstein at Aydat HaDerekh Messianic Synagogue. Shavua Tov.